My beloved brothers and sisters in Christ, have you ever been sitting alone, maybe at your kitchen table, maybe in a hospital room, maybe just staring out the window at nothing in particular, and a bird landed on the windowsill and looked right at you? Not flew past, not fluttered away, looked at you, and something in your chest went quiet. If that has ever happened to you, I need you to stay with me for the next few minutes, because I am going to tell you about 4 creatures that have shown up again and again for centuries in the quietest and heaviest moments of people's lives. And I am going to tell you what it means when they do. I have sat with the dying. I have sat with the grieving. I have sat with people who had given up entirely on hope, who told me straight to their face that they didn't believe in anything anymore. And in almost every single one of those rooms, at some point, something small and living came near, a moth against the glass, a deer standing still at the edge of the yard, not running, a robin that wouldn't leave the porch rail for 3 days straight. I used to think it was coincidence. I don't think that anymore. I think heaven is closer than we have been taught to notice. And I think it's sometimes knocked so gently that we miss it because we are looking for something loud, something dramatic, something with wings and trumpets. But that is not usually how it comes. It comes small, it comes quiet, it comes on 4 legs or 2 wings or none at all. And it waits for you to look up. So let me ask you something honestly. Has there been a strange animal encounter in your life that you never told anyone about because you were afraid they'd think you were being foolish? A bird that came back to the same spot every single day after someone you loved passed? A butterfly that landed on your hand and stayed there far longer than any butterfly should? If the answer is yes, you are not foolish and you are not alone. And by the end of this, I hope you understand exactly what you experienced and why it mattered more than you ever let yourself believe. Let me tell you about a woman I knew many years ago. I won't tell you her name, only her story, because her story could be any of ours. Her husband had been gone 6 months. 6 months of silence in a house that used to be loud with somebody else's footsteps, somebody else's coffee cup left in the sink, somebody else's voice calling her name from the other room. She told me the silence was the worst part, not the grief itself, but the quiet that came after it. The quiet that felt like being forgotten by the whole world. One morning, she sat down on her back step with a cup of tea. She didn't even want just to have something to hold, and a small brown bird landed 3 feet away from her, didn't fly off, cocked his head at her like he was listening. She said out loud to an empty yard, "I don't know if you're real or if I'm losing my mind, but if my husband sent you, do something, anything." And the bird hopped closer, closer than any wild bird has any business getting to a grown woman sitting still. And it stayed there with her for almost 20 minutes while she cried the kind of crying that had been locked up in her for half a year. She told me later, "I don't know if that was an angel, but I know I wasn't alone anymore after that." That is what I want to talk to you about today. Not superstition, not fortune-telling, not anything that claims to control the unseen or manipulate what only the Lord governs. We are not going down that road. And I will explain later exactly why that road is dangerous and why we stay far from it. What I want to talk about is something much older and much simpler than any of that. The idea held by faithful people across many, many generations that when the veil between this world and the next grows thin in moments of death, of despair, of prayer, of deep need, certain creatures seem to appear as messengers, not gods, not spirits to be summoned, not objects of worship, simply signs, small, humble signs sent by a Father who knows that sometimes we need something we can see, something with a heartbeat to remind us that we are not forgotten. Scripture itself never shies away from this. Think of how a dove came down and rested, gentle and unmistakable, in one of the most sacred moments ever recorded. The heavens opening and a living creature descending to mark the instant heaven touched earth. Think of how long before that a dove was sent out over endless gray water to search for one green branch, one sign that the flood had ended and that mercy still had the final word. That bird came back carrying an olive leaf. And it has meant hope to every generation that has heard the story since. Think of how ravens, dark, humble, unglamorous birds, were sent to feed a starving prophet, hiding in the wilderness, bringing him bread and meat morning and evening when every human hand had turned against him. God did not send an army to feed his prophet. He sent birds. That should tell you something about how he chooses to work in this world, quietly, through the small, through the overlooked. So let us begin. There are 4 creatures that appear again and again in the testimonies of the faithful, in the quiet corners of Christian tradition, in the stories whispered from grandmother to grandchild for hundreds of years as signs of a nearby angel, a nearby grace, a nearby God who has not forgotten you. I want to walk through each one with you slowly, not to turn you into someone who chases signs instead of chasing the Lord himself. Never that. And I will come back to that warning more than once today, because it matters more than the signs themselves, but to help you recognize what you may have already been given and perhaps missed. The first is the bird. Of all the creatures, the bird is the oldest and the most constant symbol of the messenger from above. And there is a beautiful, simple reason for that. Birds belong to the sky. They move between the earth we stand on and the heavens we cannot reach. A creature that lives half in our world and half in the open air above us has since the earliest ages of faith been seen as uniquely suited to carry a message between the two. When a small bird appears at a moment of deep sorrow, perched near a hospital window, tapping gently at the glass of a room where someone is praying through tears, singing outside on the very morning of a funeral, many, many believers across the centuries have taken it as a whisper, not proof, not a doctrine to be preached from a pulpit. A whisper, a little nudge that says, you are seen, you are heard, and heaven has not turned away from this room. I want you to notice something about the birds in these stories. It is almost never the loud ones. It is almost never a hawk circling or a crow shouting from a rooftop. It is the small ones, the sparrow, the little brown wren, the robin with its soft red breasts arriving in wintertime when nothing else seems to be alive in the garden. And I think that is not an accident, because our Lord himself, when he wanted to teach his followers about how closely they were watched over, did not point to eagles. He pointed to sparrows. He said that not one of those small, common, easily forgotten birds falls to the ground without the Father knowing it, and that we, each one of us listening right now, are worth so much more than many sparrows. So when a small, plain, easily overlooked bird shows up at exactly the moment you needed to feel noticed, ask yourself, could that be exactly the point that the Father is telling you through the smallest creature he made that you are seeing just as closely, just as tenderly? There is a second bird-related sign that I hear about constantly, and it deserves its own moment because it is different from an ordinary bird sighting. It is the white bird, a white dove, a white feather that seems to appear from nowhere on a windowsill in the folds of a coat on the ground directly in your path when there was no bird anywhere nearby. I have heard this story more times than I could count from people who would never in 100 years call themselves religious. A feather pure white appearing exactly where a person needed comfort. Now, I want to be careful here because I do not want you leaving this video thinking every stray feather from a pillow is a divine message. That is not what I am telling you. And I would be doing you a disservice if I let you believe every ordinary explanation is secretly supernatural. Most feathers are just feathers. But when it comes with a feeling, that quiet stillness in your chest, that sense of being suddenly, unmistakably accompanied right at the exact moment you needed it most, many faithful hearts across many generations have taken that as more than coincidence, as a small mercy sent by a Father who knows precisely when his children are breaking. The second creature I want to walk through with you is the deer. This one surprises people because we don't think of deer the way we think of birds, as creatures of the sky and the spirit. Deer are creatures of stillness, of the quiet forest edge of dawn and dusk, of that in-between hour when the world is neither fully asleep nor fully awake. And that in-between is exactly why the deer has held such meaning in the language of faith for so long. Scripture itself uses the image of a deer to describe the deepest kind of longing the human soul can feel. A deer panting after streams of water, thirsting, aching, desperate for something it cannot live without. That is meant to describe your soul reaching for God, not politely, not casually, desperately the way a thirsty animal reaches for water in the desert. So when a deer appears standing motionless at the edge of your yard, staring straight at you without fear, without running for far longer than any wild deer normally would, many believers have taken this as a sign of a very particular kind of grace, not a message of celebration, usually a message of stillness, a permission to rest. Deer are creatures that startle at the smallest sound, that vanish into the trees the instant they sense a human presence. For one to stand and simply look at you unafraid is unusual enough on its own that people notice it, remember it, tell the story for years afterward. And in the tradition of the faithful, that unnatural stillness has often been understood as a message: be still, stop running, stop striving so hard. The one who made you is closer than you think, and he is asking you in this exact moment to simply stand still long enough to feel him. I think of an older man who told me once about the night before his wife's surgery. He couldn't sleep. He went and sat on the porch at 300 in the morning with his fear sitting on his chest like a stone. And a deer walked out of the tree right up near the porch steps and simply stood there. Didn't eat, didn't move, just stood looking toward the house for what he said felt like 10 minutes, though it may have only been 2. He said something in him went quiet in that moment, not because his fear disappeared. His wife's surgery was still happening the next morning, still frightening, still entirely out of his hands, but because in his words, something told me I wasn't carrying it alone. That is what these signs are for, not to remove your burden, to remind you that you were never meant to carry it by yourself. The third creature, and this one I find so tender, so gentle, that I have to slow down even to talk about it, is the butterfly. Now, I want to be honest with you about something. The butterfly is often talked about in a New Age way these days, wrapped up in language about energy and spirit animals and other things that have nothing to do with the God we serve. And I want to gently separate that from what I am telling you now. We are not talking about vague universal energy. We are talking about a very old, very Christian understanding of transformation held by believers long before any of those modern trends existed. Think about what a butterfly actually is. It begins as something low, something crawling, something that spends its whole first life bound to a leaf, unable to see beyond where it is. And then it enters a period of complete stillness, a kind of death really wrapped and hidden and seemingly gone. And it comes out the other side utterly transformed, given wings it never had before, able to rise into the air in a way its old self could never have imagined. If that does not sound to you like the story of what our faith promises about death and resurrection, I don't know what would. The butterfly has been understood by Christian believers for centuries, appearing in ancient artwork, carved into old gravestones, painted beside images of the risen Christ as a living picture of exactly that promise, that what looks like an ending is not always an ending, that the grave is not the final word, that what is buried can rise transformed. So when a butterfly appears at a funeral, landing on a casket or a headstone, when there are no flowers nearby to explain it in a hospital room, somehow finding its way in through doors that should have kept it out on the anniversary of a loss, appearing in a place it has never been seen before or since, So many grieving hearts have taken this not as silliness, not as wishful thinking, but as a direct, tender confirmation of the very thing our faith teaches, that the one they lost is not gone, that resurrection is real, that what looked like an ending was in fact a beginning they simply could not yet see. I knew a young mother who lost her baby far too early to have any words that could possibly help her. And I will tell you plainly, I did not try to find clever words because there are none. But she told me that on the day they buried that tiny casket in the middle of a cold morning with no flowers blooming anywhere for miles, a single butterfly circled the small white box 3 times and then landed directly on top of it and stayed there through the whole service. She said it was the only thing that got her through standing upright that day. Not an explanation, not a theology lesson, just a small, fragile, impossible creature choosing that exact casket on that exact freezing morning to land and to stay. The 4th creature is one that surprises people even more than the deer, and it is the one I want you to remember most because it is the humblest of all. It is the lamb. Now, I don't mean you are likely to see an actual lamb wander into your backyard, though stranger things have happened. And I have heard even that story more than once from people who live near farmland. I mean, the lamb, as it shows up in dreams, in visions during prayer, in that strange, vivid, half-waking state some people enter during deep grief or deep illness, where the mind grows quiet enough to receive something it normally could not. People describe it consistently across years, across continents, across backgrounds that have nothing else in common. A small white lamb, calm, unafraid, simply present, sometimes walking just ahead of them on a path, sometimes lying down beside them, sometimes simply standing and looking at them the way that deer does, unafraid, unmoving, entirely at peace. I don't need to tell you why the lamb matters so deeply to our faith. You already know. The Lamb who was slain and is worthy. The Lamb who takes away the sin of the world. The Lamb is not simply a sweet, gentle animal. In our tradition, it is the very image of sacrifice, of innocence, of a love so complete it laid itself down willingly. So when that image appears to someone in their weakest, most stripped-down hour, in a dream the night before a frightening diagnosis, in a vision during a fever that nearly took them, in the strange stillness of a hospital bed at 400 in the morning. I do not think that is a random symbol pulled from nowhere. I think it is one of the deepest, oldest signs of nearness that heaven offers us. Not a stranger coming to visit, not a generic spirit, but the Lamb himself or a messenger sent in that gentle image saying, I know exactly what sacrifice feels like. I know exactly what it costs to lay something down, and I am right here with you while you do it now. And I need you to lean in for this next part because it matters more than everything I have said so far. I have to be very clear and very firm with you about something. What I have described to you today are signs, whispers, small mercies that a loving Father sometimes chooses to send in his own timing, in his own way. Never on command, never because we demanded them, never because we performed some ritual to summon them. And that last distinction is the whole difference between comfort and danger. There are practices out there, and you may have seen them online. You may have had a well-meaning neighbor or even a family member mention them to you that promise to help you call a spirit animal or read the meaning of an encounter through cards or contact a departed loved one directly through methods that ask you to open yourself up deliberately to whatever might answer. I am not going to explain those practices to you, and I want you to notice that I am not going to explain them because explaining them would be handing you the very door I am warning you to stay away from. What I will tell you plainly and without fear is this: our faith does not summon, our faith does not command the unseen world to perform for us. We do not go looking for signs the way one goes looking for a fortune. We live in prayer, in humility, and trust. And if the Father in his mercy chooses to send us a small creature as a whisper of his nearness, We receive it with gratitude and we say thank, but we never ever go hunting the unseen on our own terms, because the moment we do, we have stopped trusting him to lead and started trying to lead him instead. And that door, dear one, does not open onto comfort. It opens onto confusion, and I have watched it hurt people I love. So we do not go there. We simply stay in prayer, stay in trust, and let him send what he chooses to send in his own time. That is the whole heart of what I want to leave you with today. Not a checklist of 4 animals to go hunting for in your backyard, ticking boxes, waiting anxiously by the window for a sign to arrive on command. That is not faith. That is anxiety wearing a religious coat, and it will exhaust you far more than it will comfort you. What I want instead is for you to simply be a little more awake, a little more attentive to the small things, because I promise you, the God who counts every hair on your head and knows when a single sparrow falls is not a distant God who has to be summoned through elaborate practices. He is near. He has always been near. Sometimes nearer than your own breath, and sometimes he simply chooses to remind you of that nearness through something small, something living, something that catches your eye on an ordinary afternoon and makes you stop and think for just 1 second. Wait, was that something? So here's what I want you to do. Starting tonight, and it costs you nothing, and it asks nothing strange of you at all. Before you go to sleep, sit for just a few quiet minutes. You don't need special words. You don't need anything fancy. And simply say to him honestly whatever's heaviest on your heart right now. If you are lonely, tell him you are lonely. If you are afraid, tell him you are afraid. If you've been angry at him, and many good, faithful people have been angry at him at some point in their lives, tell him that too. He can carry your anger. He is not fragile, and he would rather hear the truth from your heart than polite words that don't mean anything. And then simply ask him quietly to let you feel that you are not alone, not with drama, not with demands, just an honest, open request from a tired heart to a father who has never once stopped listening. And then pay attention, not obsessively, not anxiously, just attentively, the way you'd notice a friend walking to a room. 'Cause I promise you, dear one, whether it comes as a small bird at your window or a deer standing still at the edge of your yard or a butterfly that lingers far longer than it should, or simply a stillness in your own chest that you cannot explain, but that feels unmistakably like being held, it will come. Maybe not tonight, maybe not this week, but it will come in his timing, 'cause that is who he is. He does not forget the sparrows, and he has certainly not forgotten you. I think about that woman on her back step so often. The one who spoke to an empty yard and asked out loud for a sign, half believing no one was listening at all. I think about how she said the bird came closer than any wild bird should. I think about how she wasn't crazy, and neither are you. If something like that has happened in your own life, and you have never told a single soul about it out of fear, they would laugh. They would not be laughing if they understood what you understood in that moment. That heaven is not as far away as we've been taught to believe, that it brushes up against our ordinary tired grieving, hopeful lives more often than we notice, and that sometimes all it takes to feel it is a small bird landing where it has no reason to land and staying when every instinct in its small body should have told it to fly. You are not forgotten. You have never been forgotten. Not for one single day of your life. Not even in the days that felt the emptiest. Not even in the nights that felt the longest. Whatever you are carrying right now as you listen to this grief or fear or simply the ache of a quiet house, I want you to know that it is seen and it is held and it is not yours to carry alone. Go gently tonight. Keep your eyes a little more open than usual. And if something small and living crosses your path in the next few days and something in your chest goes still when it does, don't talk yourself out of it. Say thank you instead. If this reached something in you today, I am so glad you stayed until the end. And I would love for you to come sit with me again next time. There is always more to talk about, always more comfort to be found together. Until then, go in peace and know that you are watched over far more closely than you have ever imagined.